Welcome to the Masonic Authors Guild International's podcast, The Wide Masonic World. Hello, I'm Magi Mark Tabbert with Magi Robert Cooper. Dr. Chernoh M. Sesay Jr. is a professor of religious studies at DePaul University, Chicago. He earned his Ph.D. from Northwestern University in nearby Evanston, Illinois. He is a historian of the Black Atlantic and of colonial North America and antebellum United States history. His research focuses on the intersection of religion, Black political thought, identity, and community formation. He is currently completing a book manuscript entitled Black Boston and the Making of African American Freemasonry, Leadership, Religion, and Community in Early America. In this study, the early development of Black Freemasonry from its founder, Prince Hall, to its prominent antebellum member, David Walker, becomes a prism through which to consider various relationships between religion, gender, community, and interracial and Black politics. He has published a book chapter in addition to articles in the New England Quarterly, the Journal of African American Studies, and the Forum for European Contributions to African American Studies. In addition to book reviews written for several scholarly periodicals, Dr. Sesay has also written for Black Perspectives, the scholarly blog of African American Intellectual History Society. Today we will discuss his paper, The Dialectic of Representation, Black Freemasonry, the Black Public, and Black Historiography, published in the Journal of African American Studies, September 2013, Volume 17, Number 3. The paper was also available through the Magi Patreon website and other podcast sources. Welcome, Professor Sesay.
Hi, Mark, and hi, Bob, and it's great to be here.
Great, good to see you again. I first met Professor Sesay well over 20 years ago when I was living in Massachusetts, and he was beginning his work on his dissertation. And I'm glad to say Chernoh and I have maintained our friendship through the years, and it's a pleasure to welcome him back to Magi. So enough said, here's my first question. Chernoh, Freemasonry is fundamentally a self-improvement organization in that its rituals and lectures instruct an individual man to improve himself through moral, intellectual, and spiritual principles. These principles are built on Greco-Roman text and Judeo-Christian scripture, that is, Greek and Roman philosophy and the Bible, as articulated by the Reverend James Anderson in his 1723 Constitutions of the Freemasons. Yet Freemasonry is also an organization, a fraternity of a large number of men. Is it therefore to say Prince Hall and his brothers of African Lodge 459 in Boston aspired to become individually virtuous as they collectively immerse themselves in Freemasonry's cultural foundations, especially Freemasonry?
So that's a great question. And the short answer to that question is yes, that Prince Hall and his cohort did strive to become individually virtuous. There are several different ways to talk about the meaning of virtue. So we can talk about virtue in a religious sense. You know, there's this idea of the golden rule and treating others as you would have them treat you. There's also virtue in an enlightenment sense, which obviously emerges out of a religious context. And yet there's this idea that virtue can have sources that animate from or that emerge from nature and not immediately or directly from a kind of spiritual source like God. And so I think both of those sources of virtue are at play in creating this attraction of Freemasonry for Black people. I also think that the issue of virtue and being virtuous stands out for Black people for several different reasons. I think that Prince Hall and his cohort understood themselves to be a kind of class of emerging leaders. And so, you know, they wanted to exemplify leadership in their behavior, but also in the ideas that they expressed. I think they wanted to present themselves as leaders because they were ambitious. I also think they wanted to present themselves as leaders at a particular historical moment where it was particularly necessary. In other words, they become Freemasons right at precisely this moment where you're beginning to get this growing rupture. It's right before shots are fired, really. Well, actually, shots are fired, but there's not a formal separation between Great Britain and its colonies. And so, at this particular moment, when state sovereignty is being challenged, when you have these tensions between ancient Freemasons and quote unquote modern Freemasons, it was really incumbent for Prince Hall, given his ambitions, to present himself in ways that would not be called into question by others for a whole variety of reasons. So to kind of circle back to this question, I think the idea of being virtuous, both from its kind of religious roots and its roots in the Enlightenment, appealed to Hall and his cohort. I also think the idea of being virtuous or presenting oneself as virtuous had very strategic and pragmatic purposes. I think both of those are true. I don't mean to say one is more true than the other.
Since Magi launched in February 2024, we have produced more than 275 hours of recorded programs, including historical papers, academic interviews, book reviews, and unabridged audiobooks. Most of these programs are now available through Patreon, Spotify, Apple, and other podcast platforms.
This podcast is for educational purposes and perhaps entertainment. While the Masonic Authors Guild International provides the most accurate information possible, listeners use the information at their own risk. This podcast and its contents are Magi's and Chernoh Sesay's property, as are all the opinions and information it presents. Robert L.D. Cooper, Mark A. Tabbert, and Chernoh Sesay, and any other speakers' views and opinions within the podcast do not represent nor speak for Freemasonry, any Masonic organization, their former or current employers in any way, shape, or form. Magi, Cooper, Tabbert, or Sesay will not compensate you in any way whatsoever if you happen to suffer an inconvenience due to the information herein contained.